Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It is almost the end of September. Holy crap. And we're finally getting exceptional weather. Like down in the 50s. I think this next week we're supposed to be getting weather down into the 40s at night. And I am looking forward to this change. It means less bugs. It means more time outside. This morning
This is the best time of year for my skin.
Oh, yeah.
No more
100%.
humidity pimples.
Oh, man. Yeah, exactly. No more clogged systems because everything is comfortable enough to function properly.
Yeah, my skin produces way less oil during the winter months. It's great. I mean, I have to use a lot more lotion, but I'd rather use lotion than have to constantly have to be stripping away oils.
Or dealing with all the issues that come with clogged pores or I'm not sure how many people realize that what most people experience as dandruff is not dandruff, and it's actually a yeast infection of the scalp. And that's really a common thing in the humid months. And that almost entirely goes away during dry months. Man, if everyone could just go to a cold climate for 3 months, no more dandruff.
Yeah, I haven't had dandruff in so long. Like the last time I really had it was my dumbass in 5th grade. I went to France and did not wear a hat during the middle of the summer, and my scalp basically got fried. I wasn't wearing sunburn or sunscreen or a hat or anything. So basically my entire scalp peeled when I got back, and it was a very traumatic experience. So I was always very careful to take care of my scalp since then, in the sense of not paying attention to it for one summer was
enough.
It was terrible. Yeah. And I learned that lesson early on.
Yeah.
You got to pay attention to your scalp.
Well, we've both got very dark hair, and I think people with dark hair understand that it traps a lot of heat, and we got to keep that covered up to some degree, because it will trap incredible amounts of heat. There are times in winter where I don't feel necessary to wear a hat, because if the sun's out, my my solar array will collect enough energy to keep my noggin warm.
Well, I tuck my hair into my shirt, so it traps the heat. That's where.
Oh, that's nice.
Functions as a hood.
I definitely like keeping the hair tucked inside the hoodie in the cold weather. No more errant blasts working their way in through the root structure into the scalp.
Well, and the heat wants to escape from the scalp.
Yeah.
So as long as you wrap the hair in a way that prevents it from escaping, it's actually pretty good to keep a good. It's really difficult to not overlayer so that you end up sweating when you're walking around or working in snow, and it's you really have to find a balance.
Yeah.
To actually stay mobile and operable, so you don't sweat and then end up getting too cold because you didn't have quite enough layers to compensate for the sweat, or not enough layers in the first place.
Well, once I start shivering, my metabolism kicks in, and then I start generating incredible amounts of heat, and then I find myself shedding layers in the snow. It's really surreal because just walking around, it's like, oh man, I need to open up my freaking parka or my puffy coat, which I really should only wear if I'm going to be stationary. You know, there was a time when I would only dressed in layers so I could peel things off, and I'm not sure when I started wearing big jackets that could really just retain heat. But it's interesting because I don't really use them unless I'm going to be standing in one place for an extended period of time. Because just even the smallest amount of activity is enough to activate, whatever metabolic processes I have that start generating body heat.
Yeah, well, and you can see on some people when it gets to past probably like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, when they start to produce heat, they'll start to steam. Like I'm one of those people. Everybody doesn't do it, and it's like I think you just have to have a certain level of endothermic reaction happening where it's like everybody doesn't get that efficient. And I think the issue is like it's a matter of efficiency, because when you're cold, you have to burn off enough to keep your body warm, but then not too much to deplete your body of the energy to keep doing that. But then also it has to sweat to cool because it's creating that reaction. So it's like a very fine balance. And I think if people don't have a proper diet, it's very difficult for their body to find that, something's going to get blocked up or something's going to overproduce. And then their thermal regulation gets out of control. And one way or the other, they sweat too much or they heat up too much, and then something bad happens. And it's like, this is to me where you have to really treat your body like an engine, where your brain is like the throttle, and know when to like let off the throttle when you need to, or to get on the throttle to keep your engine warm. And I think the more I realize like how the brain works, it kind of feels like dreams are that like throttle to keep the body from just completely shutting down during the sleep cycles. And it's like, just to make sure that you keep breathing. First off, like breathing is like, you think it's like a super regular thing that a person does, but the whole idea with sleep apnea is like some people just stop taking breaths. And for what, there's definitely not a single cause to it, but
It's like a brainstem failure if they stop breathing, though, right?
In some cases, it's like there's many causes. For example, somebody could just be laying in the wrong position, and then there could be like too much pressure on their chest, and they're not able to like draw in enough breath to compensate for the pressure from like whatever that freak position is. And that's like it's not always just there's
not always a structural issue. It's sometimes it's just a physical alignment.
A freak alignment. Like you could be, and this is one of the reasons like they encourage people with sleep apnea like not to lay back like semi-reclined, but like not fully reclined. It's like you're not supposed to lay like in like the lazy boy chair reclined, because it puts you at such an angle where it makes it difficult for your respiratory system to, it's like just the right amount of gravity to make it more difficult enough for you to breathe, that like, whereas fully horizontal isn't going to give you that same amount of resistance. So that's where like sleeping in the wrong position can be something that contributes to sleep apnea where it's not always just like, oh, this person's out of shape and unhealthy. Like it's not always that simple. But I mean, it's things like that that make me. So there's like a time when I was having a nightmare about like falling into a airport conveyor belt and like not being able to get out of it. Like that shit was terrifying. But when I woke up, it was like I was in a weird position and my head was like in between two pillows at an angle where it was like it probably was difficult for me to actually breathe. So it was like the dream was
conveyor belts are no joke. I knew a girl in high school.
Somebody just died in one.
I knew a girl in high school who she had a bunch of rings on her hands, and she was working as a dishwasher, and her rings got caught in the conveyor belt mechanism that pulls the racks into the machine. And fortunately, someone turned it off before, like, you know, it mangled her hand too much. But she had to wear this gigantic brace thing, which held everything like fully extended, and you know, multiple surgeries to repair tendons. It was fucked up. I mean, it's a machine. Like, all machines obviously need to be respected, but anything that we put our hands that close to, like the action, that's like super critical stuff.
Well, and I'm not okay with dreams. I think a lot of the whole reason I'm saying this is because recently I had a very vivid dream in which I had this. Okay, I'm going to go in very detail because the dream was so real. That's when you like wake up from these things and then you're like, does this have any meaning? And then you realize what happened the day before and you're like, oh, this is fucking stupid. This is really dumb. So this is why I don't think dreams necessarily really have any real significance except to just reflect like what happened in that day or what you were thinking about in that day and then bodily functions. So I had this, it wasn't even really a nightmare because it was like the dream involved like the very beginning. There's like a plate and there's 3 light bulbs on the plate. And
there are 4 light bulbs.
No, 3. 3. Specifically 3. So there's 3 light bulbs and inside the light bulbs are these like tofu looking objects with like, I think it's barbecue sauce on them. So I eat the 3 light bulbs for whatever fucking dumb reason. Ooh. And this is like the beginning of the dream where it's like, you know, in certain parts where you're like not in control and then you like, sometimes it like starts off completely in control and then you like realize what happened. Well, I get in control after I have eaten the light bulbs. So I spend the entire rest of the dream like, am I going to fucking die because I ate glass? And then being like, wait a minute, I don't really hurt. So is this like a thing I can eat glass? Should I eat more glass to test it out? And I'm like, and when I wake up and realize how stupid this fucking dream was, and I'm like, okay, my stomach is fine. I didn't actually eat glass. That didn't happen. And I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean? And I'm like thinking and stressing, like, is this like some deep-seated thing? And I'm like, motherfucker, I had nachos yesterday. I had fucking nachos. So this is like just eating, like it feels like you're crunching on glass effectively when you're eating it. And the sensation would be effectively like probably eating a light bulb. So my dumbass brain internalizes this shit as like eating light bulbs where I'm like, this doesn't mean anything. This is like a reflection of me eating nachos, probably getting indigestion. And then my fucking brain being like, what's going on in our stomach right now? Oh, did we eat light bulbs? Like, no, you're fucking dreaming, you idiot. So it's like the way that the brain interprets stimuli while we're sleeping, just to make sure it's like keeping a check on what's happening. If you're in like a REM cycle, it might interpret it as like you ate light bulbs when you're like, oh, I just had nachos. And that's where, I mean, it doesn't, I think people would take too much weight into what a dream means when it's like it literally could just be reflecting that you have indigestion because of what you ate, and your brain tries to reinterpret it and then does some weird roundabout. And I could have just had a fucking nacho plate in my dreams. No,
Had to be light bulbs with
light
barbecue
bulbs with
sauce.
barbecue. Yeah, and it's like, why, brain? Why would you do this? You're fucking stupid. And this is
Man.
like intelligent design, my ass. Every time some shit like this happens, I'm like, there's no such fucking thing as intelligent design because this is very terrible design. This
So-
dream cycle thing was poorly designed. It could have been way better.
There have been countless moments in my life where I've thought, hell yeah, Tina, you're a genius, because I did something that was, remarkable to me in that instant. Earlier this morning, I was scanning the interwebs, and I saw a picture of a rearview mirror with an air freshener shaped like Post Malone. And so, of course, I think, this can't be real. And, of course, it is real, because if it's on the internet, it has a very high probability of actually existing. And so I thought, well, this is Post Malone. I wonder if there's a pre-Malone. And it turns out the pre-Malone air freshener results in Unstoppable Febreze, Fresh Wave Lavender, Funk Away, Old Spice Car, also by Febreze, and Arm & Hammer. These are the top 5 results on Amazon. I'm highly amused by Funk Away.
Well, on that note, I finally thought of something that was not on the internet the other day, and let it be known, there has been no posts about the Malcolm X files yet. So, definitely going to do something with that.
That needs to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Like straight up. like
that's where I'm like,
I mean, there's so much potential. He could be a supernatural crime fighter, for all we know.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where I'm like, we can Photoshop or what's it called? Face app.
The deep fake thing?
Malcolm X, deep fake Malcolm X into some old episodes as the black guy that shows up all the time.
No, just replace Mulder
helps Mulder out.
No, just replace Mulder with Malcolm X. I mean, I like David Duchovny in his role. He does a great job in his role, but I think the Malcolm X Files doesn't need...
Oh, this would piss off the conservatives so bad. Deep fake Malcolm X into Mulder's face. Yes. The Malcolm X Files. Oh man, and that's where I'm like, I don't know what happened. Where we've been watching this show, and holy shit, is the writers' strike obvious in the progression of X-Files seasons? It like just falls off a cliff where it just becomes like a parody and a drag version of itself. Where I don't remember if it was that obvious during the writers' strike how bad things became. Just because we were in it, and
at the time, I thought they were just being silly, like they were trying.
Right, that's what it felt like. I think that's
being
what it
silly,
felt like
and they were trying to tap into some kind of adolescent Outer Limits type stuff, and they didn't really know what they were doing because Outer Limits had a very complex social message and social commentary encapsulated within its writing. Within the stories. And I think what happened with X-Files is that in their attempt to cover up the lack of actual story development, they were kind of sidelined with, well, we've got this universe that we can play with. We can make these things happen. Sure, we'll just write it. We'll make it happen. And then it loses that serious tone that it has. Yeah, the writer's strike episodes suck.
was I mean, and now that I'm realizing what happened across a lot of media, I think a lot of the idiocy that we see now is like a tandem degradation of creativity through the writer's strike affecting our media, but also the test-oriented public schooling, where it's like it became all about passing the test, and nobody like the arts got defunded. Like they stopped having music classes and art classes and shit like that. Definitely not creative writing. Fucking, there's no way they were doing creative writing.
Well,
so
you can't quantify literature like that. It's not something that you can test for on a Scantron effectively. Basic reading comprehension, sure, and basic memory tests, yeah, fine, whatever. But you got to have somebody qualified to read every essay, and not just qualified to read it, but they have to understand the goal and scope of the evaluation sufficiently. And if we're talking about teachers, that means they have to be well educated and compensated appropriately. And I never got the impression that I was getting like collegiate level education in high school.
well, and when it became test oriented, if the test scores got too low, they would lose their funding. So in a lot of cases, I mean, not a lot, but in some cases, the teachers would just give the students the fucking answers so they didn't lose their funding. And it became this issue of like, the system was definitely not designed to make creative or creatively inclined people at the end of the process. And when our media became less and less oriented towards complex subjects and storylines, then it was like this double-edged sword of mental degradation where I think it's not that the kids are dumb. They're definitely not dumb. It's more so the adults got dumber, I think. Whereas, like, I think a lot of the kids seem to avoid the shit, and they're reading and they're doing stuff where it's the kids are all right. The kids will be all right.
I think this
I'm
is
not
where
worried about them personally.
You know, at the collegiate university level, they perform like pedagogical analysis regularly to determine whether or not the programs that are being offered are functional or useful, and they work with like the School of Education to arrive at their conclusions. That's my understanding, at least. I'm like almost 100% positive that's not happening at high school level, at primary education level, because when I look, okay, like when I looked at like the Core 40 math stuff, no, it wasn't Core 40. Was that what they called it? It wasn't Core 40. It was Common Core Math. I recognized it as like basic intro to programming.
Exactly.
It wasn't math. It wasn't teaching people math principles. It wasn't, and I'm not talking about like rote memorization of like multiplication or division tables. I mean, like it wasn't actually teaching the concepts of math. It was,
well, and further, it's object-oriented programming, which is more useful than just standard programming. So I immediately saw it too, which is also where I'm like, oh, parents have no business teaching this stuff to their kids. Like they should be learning it alongside their kids, but they think because they're adults that they should stop learning and that they have all the tools that they're equipped to move forward as adults, and society should just like stop where they stopped.
Well,
and that's like the unfortunate side effect of the anti-intellectual mindset of like, oh, once you graduate, you stop learning.
I mean,
it's like
is just your average high school math teacher equipped or qualified to teach computer science? I mean, do they even realize they're teaching computer science?
Not in America.
Yeah, that's what I mean though. Like,
but in general, like
they
might be, because it's like, okay, for example, in my high school, they had the same qualifications as like your mom did when she was teaching at a college or as a professor. Because like I know almost all of my professors had PhDs and had them for a long time and had published. But these were like high school. But I went to a private school,
Yeah.
so that's where like the private schools have the level of education that they're supposed to, and it's on par with the college level professors. But that's not common. That's not the standard.
Is your high school now doing the Common Core math program?
No.
Yeah, they're still teaching
No.
real math, probably.
Because they also had a computer program though, so they do teach. They just straight up teach programming. So that's where it's like they don't have to switch to Common Core because they're not on the IU or the Indiana. Like they don't have to like. I know they have to do the I-step at a certain stage, but the kids are doing the I-steps like way earlier at Park Tudor and just passing it.
Yeah.
Like getting it out of the way. Whereas like in other schools, they take it like 3 years later because they're like, I think we took our I-step my freshman year of high school, whereas they like take it in like junior, senior in public schools because they're not ready. Like our middle school at Park Tudor was ready to take the high school I-step basically coming into freshman year. And that's why they had a 99% college placement rate. And the only reason it was 99% is because Tony George's nephew didn't want to go to college. And then this other chick didn't want to go to school. And they basically kicked them out of school rather than like lose. They tried to like, they ended up kicking the one chick out. But because it was Tony George's nephew, they couldn't kick the other dude out. So it was like they tried really, like I remember how hard they tried to get this dude kicked out, but his family was so fucking rich. Of course, you're not going to be able to kick out anybody in the family of the fucking Indianapolis Speedway. And that's what happened. That's why they lost their 100% placement rate.
The board
was
is like
funny.
The board's like, our math scores are low. We need to bring in some Asian ringers. That's what it inspires.
Nah, bro.
Like
No, this is way worse. They were like bringing in people from like Serbia and Lithuania to play basketball and fucking hockey. Like, no, they were straight up flying in international students for the sports team. This is like way worse than you thought. Like it's like this is like the Disney, and I do sincerely mean this is like Disney villain level shit that was happening at this school in a way where you're like, this is what the rich people do, which is why public school kids can't compete with them because the fucking, even though we were like a 1A team, we had to compete with the 5A team because we were flying in our fucking probably 20-year-old Lithuanian students to play on the basketball team with fucking full ass beards with like, this dude had like full on war trauma. I remember his name was Sinisha. He was like, he had a fucking bloody flag that he would cry about the war shit he went through and had to fucking fight. And I'm like, this is a grown ass man. And I mean, like, seriously, bro.
I'm not laughing at his war trauma. I'm laughing at the idea of like flying in a grown ass man to play fucking hockey with kids.
I could not make this shit up if I tried. No, this dude played basketball. Sinisha played basketball, but he also fucking drove a Lamborghini. Let me repeat. Dude drove a Lamborghini because the family he stayed with could just buy him a fucking Lamborghini. So they were like flying over people. Dude was like 6'3" or 4. Definitely had a full beard. And when I say full beard, I'm talking about when he shaved, it was already grown back. So this dude never had a clean shaven face because his shit grew too fast. Because he clearly saw some shit. Like when you see some shit, you shave and you already got a beard underneath it. Like this dude, like I said, he would be crying about the bloody flag that he had. And I'm like, thinking about this now, it's like, it doesn't even sound real. But this is the type of people that they would like fly in to play on the like basketball team.
You know, there was
it's like,
you reminded me of an episode of Community where Abed and
yes, it's exactly like that. But this is like This is like a real person. This is like it's exactly like that, but a real person. Which is where I'm like, that episode of Community felt surreal in the sense of like, I've been in that situation, but real. But also where the dude is like living in the basement of a wealthy person's mansion and has a fucking Lamborghini that he can just drive, where you're like, dude, what? What?
That's such a crazy student exchange program. I wonder if there was actually an exchange or if it was just an import.
No, it was just an import. This is not exchange.
There's no exchange. Imports. Just like, hey, we need to...
No, this is straight imports.
Wow.
They did this in multiple sports, which is also, like I said, this is why we had to compete with 5A instead of 1A.
That's super scandalous. That's like, how can that even be like... how can that even pass the...
Did you ever see the movie Blue Chips?
Oh, yeah. That was that Nick Nolte movie, right?
So the same shit happened at IU.
Yep.
Where it's like, it's just on such smaller scales where it's like, you go look at the cars the fucking basketball and football players are driving. They have no business driving these fucking cars.
Yeah, like I see every year I see a brand new G-Wagon, and it looks like the person driving its head is up on the ceiling of the vehicle.
I saw a blue Lamborghini the other day. Yeah, exactly. You know it's a fucking basketball player when it's like a Maserati or a fucking Lamborghini or a G-Wagon or some shit. You're like, this is a $200,000. What the fuck? Oh, but football player. But that's the type of shit that's not supposed to be legal. Well, it is legal now, but they were doing it anyway. So it's like when it wasn't legal, they would still be driving these cars where that's the type of shit that they would give them instead of paying them. So that's where instead of putting them in a position where they're like just getting a $200,000 check, it's like a fucking Lamborghini. Here you go, kid. Go drive this around a college campus and not like look like a pimp in front of the fucking undergrads, and nobody else like questions it because they're too starstruck. And they create this like, I tutored a football player and they made it seem like I should be like
thanking them.
I mean, I had to sign an NDA at the time where, you know, it's for the sake of like, if somebody gets injured, you can't go be like, oh, this person's injured because you could change the betting lines or some. That's what they were saying or whatever. But the way they were saying it is like they made it seem like I should just do the work for the guy instead of like actually tutor him. And I was like, nah, I'm not doing that shit. And they ended up firing me and probably replacing me with somebody who just did the work instead.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm like, that's the type of shit they do. I think they thought I was just gonna fucking do the work for the guy, and that's the way it seems like they operate and get these tutors where you end up with this guy who's got like a 4.0, but gets his like cranium crushed for a fucking living. So there's no fucking way he could actually maintain those grades, but it's because they pay somebody to do it, and it didn't pay like the pay wasn't bad at all. It's just more so. I wasn't about to do that shit and operate like that, but knowing that's how they were doing it, you know, like 2003, 2004, I doubt it got any better, especially when it became legal to start paying the fucking sports players as employees. I bet like the football and basketball players probably would make way more than any professor.
Well, those athletics programs pay for themselves with ticket sales and merch mostly, right?
That's the idea, but research could do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they don't put money into research the same way they do into athletics. So it's like you can't get that data because they're not funding it. And this is where the shit like,
well, that's how we end up with athletics programs.
Center gets shut down.
That's how we end up with athletics programs with extracurricular educations. This is a really, it's not even like a slippery slope anymore. It's a steep
No.
like shale wall and it's raining.
Yep. Yep. And that's where, this is ultimately the effect of military industrial turning everything into a propagandistic arm of like xenophobic opposition through team structures and proxy wars through the form of combat sports. So it's like all that happening in tandem where then you got the people, I just want to keep the politics out of my sports. Well, this is a fucking proxy for combat. Like this sport you're watching is a literal proxy for combat. So it's automatically political, but just out the gate. Like this is a metaphor for war. So how are you going to separate politics from a fucking literal metaphor for war? Can't. So
I think that concept is a little high. It's like the kind of thing that if one is unable to abstract, they would never be able to connect the proxy conflict to athletics.
But that's also how we have a proxy war between the United States and Iran happening in Ukraine.
I mean, I blame
and
like
Americans
a lack
don't
of
really fucking understand.
I blame a lack of focus on literature. I don't think
those things are
and creative writing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I don't think those things are accidents. Which is where when somebody doesn't understand the metaphor for war in football, that's when they're not going to understand the proxy war happening in Ukraine between the United States and Iran, which is funny. I mean, it's not funny, but to me, on many levels, it represents Russia acknowledging that they militarily are on the same level as Ukraine and need proxy support via Iran. But at the same time, because Americans are like very narrow-minded, this feels like to me they're trying to reproduce the Cold War nuclear scare scenario and like traumatize a new generation into docility. That shit ain't gonna work again. And if they do actually drop nukes, well, guess what? You've just put everybody in a situation where everything is on the table now and nobody's going to follow any rule of law. So I don't think either side has the real option of dropping outside of Ukraine. Nobody cares about Ukraine enough for them to care. Like if Russia dropped a nuke in Ukraine and then signed a peace treaty with America, Americans would move on with their lives very quickly and would not shed an actual tear. I don't think. Not even a single tear for the Ukrainians that would get like wiped out instantly because they are too desensitized to violence. Where like I said, I don't think the Americans that cry over everything obviously will cry. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the average American who just turns on the TV and consumes news every day where they're subjected to like Americans dying by gun violence constantly and they don't react to that.
Oh, the person who sees a tank explode and laughs about it.
Exactly. Like if Ukrainians get nuked, it's like Call of Duty. It's like a video game to Americans. Until they see that shit in person, it's like they're too desensitized, even down to like the way that they're watching the Jeffrey Dahmer shit. It's like as if Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a real person now and the people that he killed wasn't real. It's like they're so actually desensitized to if something's presented in the form of television, it might as well be fiction. And that's, I think the news, everyone knows that happens, but no one is like working to stop it from the sides that have created it. So it's just getting worse in the sense of Americans love their echo chambers, especially because of Facebook.
And I've successfully avoided the Dahmer movie or whatever it is. I have no interest
no interest
in that shit.
I've just been watching reactions.
I'm continually perplexed by this fascination that our our society has with killers and criminals, and like to the point of practically exalting them, giving them front page on Rolling Stone, and then writing these long-winded pieces about how they got to the point where they broke and had to do some dumb shit. Like,
Well,
that's a problem.
true crime is another result of the writers' strike.
Yeah, well,
That's another one of these things where you see when like the less you need writers to actually start develop the story, and they can just go back and they're like copying. Oh, one of the most disturbing things is
this
like
is art imitating life.
it's not even imitating, it's copying.
Yeah.
They just straight up copied one of the cousins of one of the victims had a breakdown in court and went to like chase after Dahmer, and the lady just basically copied the breakdown as if this is like, oh, it's a great performance, but you're just copying someone's pain, and that's not cool, especially when the families are out there saying, hey, Netflix didn't ask us about this. We're not getting compensated. So you're just basically exploiting our trauma for the sake of a few moments of entertainment and moving on with your lives as if this is not re-traumatizing those people. So that to me is, again, that's like, Americans are not going to fucking care if a nuke gets dropped on Ukraine. And this is the beast that's been created. And I think people would get mad at me for saying that shit instead of getting mad at Americans for having no fucking empathy and being the ones who wouldn't cry over the bomb getting dropped on Ukrainians. Because that is like, that's the problem. It's not me saying it. And again, Americans are so conditioned to get upset at the wrong thing. Like, oh, you're gonna get upset at a fucking black mermaid and not get upset at racism? You're an unserious people. This whole population is unserious. Should not be taken seriously on a small or a global scale. We got a lot of shit to deal with as a country before anyone outside of our borders or within our borders should take us seriously. I mean, no one should take any American seriously.
As if it needed to be said, mermaids are fictional fantasy creatures.
Right.
Their scales, their fish scales can be any tone or color profile we want them to be. Their skin can be any tone or color profile we want them to be. Same goes for elves and orcs and goblins and fairies and... Did I already say elves? Because I'll say elves again. Elves, giants. In fact, humans have a huge spectrum of pigmentation in our skin. You know, this is the idea that people get up in arms about. You know, I wonder if they're really mad about She-Hulk because she has green skin.
That's part of it, but it's also because it's a show that's not focused on men. Just that alone is why they're pissed about it. It's not trying to appease a male audience, and if there's men that enjoy it, that's okay by them, but that's not who they're going after. There's been times where I'm like, oh, this isn't for me. I still enjoy it. This is not for me because there's shit that went over my head. So, for example, some shit, I'm going to say that, this went over every man's head because we don't have to go through this. So, when She-Hulk is in a situation where she, like, slept with old dude, the doctor, and then she wakes up as herself in the next morning, that's a metaphor for the way dudes react when they see their women without, well, not their women, a woman without makeup for the first time and like do that shit. And that was like completely lost on me. I didn't even think about that shit. But when I saw women's like saying that and saying that was like, oh, that hit home with me because I'm like, oh shit, this is definitely not, I mean, in the sense of not like I said, the writers are like, oh, you're a dude, you're cool. You like, oh, you enjoy this, cool, stick around, but this is not for you. Understand that. The writers want me to understand it as a dude. The show is not for me, but it's okay if I watch. So if I complain, just remember, hey, this is not your show.
There is one character for guys, though. It's the one dude in the superhero law division who's like super cool, who shows up with his gift basket and is like, hey, this is a map. This shows you the best place to poop. Like that,
I don't think he's for guys. I don't think that dude's for guys either.
I think he is.
I don't think. I think that guy is not cis in real life. That's a fantasy guy for women. That's a cis hetero male that's attentive and pays attention to your needs and is not opaque when trying to get in someone's pants, but is nice for the sake of being nice. That is like for women. That's not a guy character to me in the sense of when I like step back and look at, like, I could see how guys could identify with him because he's the only real straight cis male. Like, that's the guy you're supposed to identify with for sure. But he's also written in a way that, like I said, it's like he's not gross, but when he's being gross, it's funny because he knows he's being gross. But it's like there's a fine line where women aren't going to find that dude funny if he crosses certain lines. That's why he doesn't cross certain lines. And if it was for dudes, he would totally cross those lines and worse. And that's where I'm like, that's why to me, there's, like I said, there's certain things where I'm like, I don't know. I haven't looked at the writers list, but I have a feeling it's like more women writing than men on this particular show because the themes that they, like even the wedding shit, for example, it's like if this were a show for dudes, they would not have done that wedding episode. Because
I thought that was it was really fun when she announced like this is a standalone wedding episode.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of dudes probably cut that shit off immediately. Like, you are not the standard dude, so you kept watching. I can guarantee you 60% of the dudes just cut to the end to see what the fucking cameo was or what the addendum piece was because they're like, oh, this is going to be a filler episode instead of actually watching it and having fun with what it was. And that is where, again, the guys that stayed, good for them for being able to have fun, but it wasn't for us. And that's okay. This is like, they literally said they didn't mean incel, like all men. It's like, sorry, incels, not all content is for you. And that's where I mean, like, that's a not all men moment. But if you identify as an incel, you're going to take that shit personally. But neither one of us identifies as an incel. So we're going to keep watching because they're not making fun of us because we're not offended when they make fun of men. So that's where it's like, you gotta allow this show to make fun of male tropes and all of the male stereotypes that are out there in order to get the comedy. But if you take any of that shit personally, then it's not going to be funny.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like by proxy of watching this far, you're not taking any of that shit personally.
Man,
there's a ton of dudes out there that are.
I'm really enjoying She-Hulk. It's like a breath of fresh air. It has self-contained stories that resolve themselves within the entirety of the episode. And it has this overarching story arc that is developing that may or may not result in anything. But it doesn't matter because it's still fun. And I think this is like the most successful Marvel story thus far because it's entirely fun. I know that's not true. The Thor movie, the first Thor movie and the third Thor movie were really fun. Were really, really fun. And
well, it is. And I think it's reset the street level in a way that I think No Way Home was struggling to do. Like, to go back from scaling back from cosmic to street level is really fucking difficult. And this is like the first time I feel like they've been successful in scaling it back in that. Like, Moon Knight was like, oh, you end with like a fucking kaiju bat. Oh, okay, I guess. I don't know. Like, Moon Knight to me was like, it fell apart. And there's a lot of cool stuff that it did, but it felt like a bunch of different writers had a bunch of different ideas, and none of them were cohesive. Yeah. And they were like, "Oh, we'll just use his dissociative identity disorder as a reason not to have a cohesive plot." I'm like, I'm not buying it.
But Moon Knight wasn't fun.
It wasn't, and there were fun moments, but it was not fun.
But it struggled to have fun moments. She-Hulk
it was like even the same with Miss Marvel. That like there were fun moments in Miss Marvel, but that's when I'm like, I don't know if this is like modern fun or if this is like what the writers being like 40 years old think is modern fun. So a lot of the stuff to me felt like older people writing what they thought was going to land on younger people. Whereas like if you watch some CW shows, their writing is clearly for teenagers, but it's like so over dramatic that you're like, oh, this is like still believable comic book over dramatizing. And that's where you can't get too realistic when you're dealing with comic book source material adaptation, because I think the issue is like I think you really have to go melodramatic or comedic just to ensure that the thing doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah, we already have Batman. We get a Batman movie every couple of years. We don't need every comic adaptation to strive to become serious like Batman. That would be like the absolute, complete, utter death of comic book adaptation.
Yeah, and
even Batman
I'm not sure
cartoons don't
this is
have
gonna
fun
hold up
sometimes.
well. I'm not sure the Nolan Batman is going to hold up over time the way that people think it is, in that when you go too realistic, you lose something that was the comic book element to it, which is where like they straddle the line. There are some certain things where they like invoke the comic book hyper reality, but when it's like too real, then it just becomes like an action, or not an action. It's like a drama with some action scattered in it. And I know that's kind of what he was going for, but that's also why, like I said, I don't know if it's going to hold up over time. It was like very novel. And as we have more directors and writers getting better about balancing seriousness and hyper reality, I think we're getting better iterations. Like the CW stuff is just really good. The CGI is not necessarily the best, but the writing is really good. And again, there's this element. There has to be something fun.
CW excels at finding or casting people who seem to want to be in the role, and they really want to like embody the role, and you can tell because they carry the character really well over multiple seasons, and the stories don't just disintegrate because an actor gets tired of putting the costume on. And what I see in a lot of movies is these actors and actresses who put on the costume, and they're very talented actors and actresses. But I don't believe that I believe that maybe a few of them have read the comics on their own without any kind of outside input. It wasn't a suggestion, hey, you should read this. They already read it. Like, I feel pretty confident that that Chris Hemsworth read Thor at least once in his life and enjoyed the living crap out of it. And so when he was given the role, it's like, are you kidding? I get to be Thor? Like, and that's how I felt with watching even Mark Ruffalo's Hulk. I had this sensation that he actually had read Hulk comics and enjoyed it. But when I saw like Scarlet Witch, I felt like she had read the comics after she was like, said, hey, do you want to do something like this? He's like, yeah, of course. Who doesn't want to do a superhero movie? Work for Disney, make lots of money. And then, of course, there are people like RDJ and Samuel Jackson where they completely rewrite and redraw the characters to resemble them more in real life.
Yeah. Apparently, Luke Wilson is a similar thing with Stripesy. That's where, like, the Stargirl universe, I thought was really well done because it resurrects the JSA at like the perfect time, but through a new generation. And I think that's one of the problems that Batman has gotten stuck in, not being able to, like they did Batman Inc. They've had multiple people take the mantle of Batman, but in the media form, people have not been able to move past Batman as like being like technically Cassandra Cain should be able to beat Batman in a fight, or like fucking Dick Grayson should be able to beat Batman in a fight, like as an adult, for a few reasons. Not to say that it's just because, oh, you get trained by certain people, but it's like, of all the people who should be better than Batman at this point, it's like at least a few people who trained under him and grew up, like Damian should be better than Batman as an adult.
I think Damian can only beat Batman because Batman won't. He just won't. he'll just stop it.
Yeah, and that's where obviously Batman's going to continue to train and all this other shit, but I think that's where like you can't keep him. They didn't keep him as the best in the comics, but it's hard for people, like I said, it's hard for people in other forms of media to move past it, and maybe Batman Beyond has been one of the only times they've been able to successfully do it, because he's like clearly an old man.
Well, he needed the suit just to fight at a basic Batman level.
Yeah, and it's like once he's like 85, 90, then you're like, okay, of course. But you can't have a 60-year-old Batman that's like...
He had to build a suit in Return of the Dark Knight to fight Superman. And so we know that at a certain point, he recognizes his own physical limitations. But even in that comic, they show him going up against the gang boss and, toe-to-toe, and I'm breaking him, but still, he's an old man. And even Alfred is like, he'll kill you. he's in his physical prime. Bruce, don't do it. And Bruce almost dies. So, there's definitely a continuum with Batman where for the audience members, where Batman can never age and he's always peak physical condition, always has the mental acumen to stand toe-to-toe with Lex Luthor, or the resources to create a freaking Gundam to fight fucking Darkseid. I actually like old Bruce more. I actually thought Batfleck was a good old Bruce because he seemed tired, but he also seemed like he wasn't in the kind of shape that Batman needs to be in.
Yeah, I think that was probably the most Batman animated series like iteration we had in live action.
Yeah.
Like, I really felt like he was channeling that version. Not to say that he wasn't trying to channel shit from the comic books.
Oh no, he was definitely channeling Kevin Conroy.
yeah, I thought so too. Which is funny to look back and see like Christian Bale do the voice thing first. And then that shit starts to like catch on, is like everybody just accepts it as being part of the character when it wasn't really always. But yeah, I do enjoy the different iterations, but I mean,
it's funny, Christian Bale's Batman scares people with his gravelly, threatening voice. Kevin Conroy Batman just kicks their asses. I think that to really drive home like the year one adaptation, they had to make it a lot darker even than the comic was. Because in my reading of year one, I never imagined he had tiny ears and his cape wasn't even that big in year one. But I never read Batman as like, I guess I never read him as a sociopath until I was older. And then it just started to emerge from there.
Well, some versions don't write it as obviously as others, whereas I think it was really
It's Frank Miller that really, I think,
post Tim Drake
yeah.
or post Jason Todd death and Tim Drake replacing that. It's like, oh, this dude just doesn't care, and they started to write him like the whole child. I mean, yeah, Frank Miller did the child soldier thing first. What was it, Cody? I forget the girl's name.
I think it's Cody.
Whichever,
yeah, the never mentioned female Robin that wasn't Batgirl.
Right.
Like,
yeah, the female Robin that was like. It's weird because Frank Miller is a super like right wing douchebag, but he gets these weird
broken clock moments.
Yeah, progressive broken clock moments. Like Martha Washington Goes to War. Like, oh, dude, I see what you were trying to do, but you're a fucking right wing piece of shit. Like, Frank Miller is like one of those weird things where I have so much respect for his work, but he's such a douchebag when I'm like, fuck this guy. I just, anytime I hear him talk, I'm just like, fuck this guy. I can't believe I liked any of your work. And it makes me upset that I ever liked anything you did. It makes me question myself. So he's one of those weird ones, man.
I think that is the reason that he was able to write Batman so well.
Yeah, true.
Because deep down, Batman's not a progressive person within his ideology. He's an authoritarian. He's an absolute wielding technology.
Batman's fucking fascist.
He is. He wields technology freely because he has absolute control over a corporate state, and he has the absolute most advanced technology outside of LexCorp. And what does he do? He beats up criminals, street-level criminals, and only deals with local organized crime. That's real Batman. Everything in space and extra solar Batman stuff, that's nice.
That's why I like the Dark Crisis stuff because, or it's the Death Metal. I didn't read the Dark Crisis yet. Death Metal, Batman's basically the enemy, and he's the universe's greatest threat,
as he should be.
Right. So they've embraced that in the comic books, whereas like there's no way that anybody in media form is ready for those stories. I mean,
let's be realistic about it. Any human that can develop the technology to stand toe to toe and defeat Darkseid alone is the absolute most dangerous creature in existence. Because Darkseid is an interdimensional being. Like, a human that can do that? Fuck.
Yeah. So that's where I really enjoyed the cosmic level Batman Who Laughs storyline, where it's like, yeah, because of the way he's been written, he should be that universe's greatest villain for a while. So I enjoyed, like, I really got back, there's a period in comic books where it just became about variant covers, and the writing suffered in the same way that the media suffered from, I guess television and movies suffered from the writer's strike. And it was like not fun, but that seems to have ended in a way where the writing's a lot better, just in general again. And, I think the issue is when they're not willing to address social issues or willing to put their universe through some sort of identity crisis, then the writing becomes stale. But that's where it's like, yeah, we need to really examine is Batman and Bruce Wayne a good guy, and how does Bruce Wayne redeem himself in light of acknowledging that he's one of the universes or one of the multiverses Bruce Wayne's become the biggest existential threat to all of the multiverse, because that's the way we should have been thinking about it the entire time. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's where,
like, compared to the darkest version of Bruce, Darkseid's actually pleasant. Darkseid will have a conversation with you before he kills you.
yeah, they they did a good job with these storylines, which is again where I feel like the good writing is back across, like, Marvel's writing was whack for a while too, but it's gotten better. And I do think in a sense they are trying to actively like advertise the diversity. Like they'll put like a gay couple kissing on the cover of their like issues, but it's like they used to do that with straight people, so it's not like a big deal. So I think that's where they're not. I think it would seem as if they're overcompensating for their like homophobic past, but I think they're just like becoming equivalent in the sense of, yeah, they have a ton of gay characters in their universes, so there's gonna be like gay covers now where there's like actively people making out like gay couples, and conservatives are gonna get up in arms about it, but that's just like that's the way it should have been all the time. But like I said, I think it would seem as if they're overcompensating with representation, but it just should have been that way all along.
I really hope that when they finally introduce the rest of the original series crew in Strange New Worlds, that they allow the Sulu character to be gay. Because it's, 70 years, 60 years of this shit? 50 years, whatever.
I feel like they would have been gay on...
they did it in the Kelvin timeline.
Well, on Lower Decks. I know there's definitely a lot of gay jokes on Lower Decks.
But they aren't. But that's well after the original series would have.
Oh yeah.
Because they're all Next Generation era, or even semi post Next Generation era stories. I guess they are post Next Generation because Riker has his own ship and Picard is nowhere to be seen. Lower Decks this season is fantastic.
Yeah, they did a really good job. Yeah, that's one of those shows that it's like one of the most Star Trek shows while also being the least Star Trek.
No. Star Trek Prodigy is the least Star Trek. Enterprise is...
I guess I never... Yeah.
Yeah, no, I watched 5 to 10 minutes of Prodigy and I turned it off because Hologram Janeway was too much for me.
Yeah.
That's an anti-Star Trek show. And I still think that Enterprise is pre-Star Trek. It's like because it's all pre-Federation. It ends with the formation of the Federation. So it's not actually a Star Trek show. It's a Enterprise show.
Which is probably why I can't get into it. I just can't. Yeah. It's like it feels like a Western.
Man, it's the theme song. It's that stupid.
It's not just the theme song. No, it was like I think when I first started watching it, somebody like pulled out a shotgun within the first 5 minutes. I'm like, what the fuck? I can't do this. Yeah. A shotgun
in space?
No, but they hadn't gone to space yet. It was like something happened on a farm.
Oh,
what I remember, like they definitely hadn't made it to space yet, which is where I tapped out real quick.
Oh, the thing that Lower Decks does so well is that it's a serial, and while there is a storyline that reaches across an entire season, it's like it's almost an afterthought. It's almost like, hey guys, this actually kind of is a cohesive background story, and then it emerges like as a fully realized season story arc, and that's brilliant. That's like the stuff that I liked the most about seasons 5 and 6 of Next Generation, is that they had this continuous arc seeded with tiny little serials. And it was just, that to me is what makes Star Trek, is that you can watch it out of sequence and it's still fun. I think that's the real key, is that Lower Decks is fun the entire time. And they're playing with all of our emotions regarding how we feel about Star Trek in the best ways. They're like teasing us in the most playful and fun ways.
Yeah. Which again, I think that's where a lot of Star Trek is not fun. Even on Voyager, fun would get littered throughout, and some of the seasons it was just full on bleak.
Yep.
It's like, oh my God, what happened to the fun, guys? I was here for the fun, but I'm not the like Tom Paris fun. That's too non-Star Trek. And
Yeah.
I had a hard time with the Tom Paris episodes.
I'm really a fan of the Cisco version of fun, which is, we're not going to do anything Starfleet related. We're going to cook. We're going to hang out. We're going to go do something. We're going to build a spaceship. Like,
yeah. Build a solar sail.
Build a freaking solar sail and fly to Cardassia in 3 hours.
Yes. And prove that the ancient Bajorans could have done it.
Reveal that they're actually the same people.
Uh-huh. Yep.
That's the kind of thing that's sorely lacking in the Star Wars serialized microcosm. They made this show Andor, and it's supposed to explain the events between Obi-Wan leading up to Rogue One, and I couldn't make it through the first episode without falling asleep. The first episode I paused it, and then I tried to rewatch it, and then I fell asleep. And then I tried to rewatch it again, but I just walked away from it. I couldn't finish it. And I thought, well, maybe it's just a bad episode. I'll pick up on episode 2, and I just fell asleep again. It's like a gift for insomniacs, maybe. It's terrible.
That's funny. I totally use like poorly paced space movies to fall asleep.
Well, this is like, it's like it's a drama. It's not even in space so far. It's all like in alleys and.
I guess I should say sci-fi.
Yeah, one of my buddies described it as a poor riff on Blade Runner, and what was the other thing? Oh yeah, like a version of Law and Order that didn't bother to attempt how they arrived at any conclusions. And so I haven't even been able to finish the second episode or the first episode, and I'm not even going to try the third episode at this point because I don't need to take a nap anytime soon. Maybe I'll do it later tonight per your suggestion. I always thought that Star Wars was such a rich story universe that it would be easy to create just brand new stories out of it, but they're trying to shoehorn a explanation story in between.
Well, and that's why it's so dead. And I think I stopped on. Oh man, I can't remember when I stopped, but at some point I just tapped. I think it was the second season of Mandalorian. I don't think I made it through. Yeah, it just got to be too much. Where I'm like, well, because then I tried to start the Bad Batch, and I fucking hate that type of animation.
Yeah,
so
I like the stories of Bad Batch, but the animation,
the stories
can't
cool.
watch it. It's like the seventh season of Clone Wars has fantastic story, but it's hard to look at.
Well, and every time I would see the Bad Batch advertisement, I thought it said the bad bitch, and I would laugh about it. So I'm like, oh, this might be good. And then I would watch it, and it was not. So
Star Wars, the
always
bad
just-
bitch. That's like that's got to be like the meanest assassin. That's what that story is about.
I would just always see it briefly like pop up in the
Better, it's like Mace
it's like-
Windu's wife or sister or something like that. She's way meaner than he is. That's why he's so serious.
Well, whenever I look at the pirate sites, they always show the like still that would be in the whatever service they would have. So if it was like Disney Plus, it would be like the still that was there.
Yeah.
So this is where I've also seen everybody's doing the same fucking setups, and ever since about I don't want to say 2017, it's like once there's like say The Walking Dead decides the cover for their season, everybody follows that same setup. And then if like Stargirl has a setup, everybody follows that. Everybody was using the Flash.
Oh, they got the same. They're all
for
going
a
to the
while.
same like marketing department or ad
Right,
department.
exactly.
Ad
And it all
agency.
and you can tell because they're putting everybody in the same spots, the same fucking
Yeah.
like
They're
the
just using a
antagonist will
template.
be yes, and the template started to become obvious if you look if you see them all next to each other between the different organizations like Hulu and Disney Plus and Netflix. Like if you only have one, you're not going to notice it, but when you see all of them next to each other, it's like, oh my god, they're just copying each other. And this gives back to the lack of creativity. Just everything is becoming the same, and there's enough where somebody who's actually trying to like stay sane through media, it's like, oh, you just mine all the bad perceived bad shit to see what other shit's out there instead of like looking at new bad shit because all the new shit is mostly bad. So it's like you might as well look through old bad shit to find gems rather than expecting any gems from the new shit because most of the new shit's terrible. So I'm like, you can't that whole lipstick on a pig thing is like the way the film industry used CGI with writing, and they can't cover up bad writing with CGI, and they've been trying to do that shit for years, and it's just not working.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, there's a reason you can still watch Terminator, and it's not. They use even though the practical effects aren't even that great, the writing is such that it's better to watch the original Terminator than Terminator 3 or Terminator Genesis or whatever the fuck. Any non-Terminator or Terminator 2 films are just not as good because they leaned on the CGI instead of fucking having good writing.
I mean, also Arnold keeps getting older.
True.
And
That's
so
true.
they have to do as much smoothing and noise reduction and sharpening and contrast manipulation as they can possibly put on them because
But the original movie was about Kyle Reese.
yeah, it's true.
And fucking
Sarah Connor.
Sarah Connor. I was gonna say Linda Hamilton.
Linda Hamilton and her twin.
Kyle Reese and Linda Hamilton and their baby.
Yeah. You know, that's a
Nobody ever
really
learned
good
Kyle
point.
Reese's real name.
That's a really good point, though. Like that story is about Kyle.
It's supposed to be about them.
Yeah, but it ends up
But
being about
because
the
of
machine.
American perception, it's like really hard to not think that movie is about Arnold somehow.
Well,
Even-
if
it's like-
if the average American is truly super patriotic and supports the empire, then they're going to get behind Skynet 100% because their tax dollars paid for Skynet, and Skynet's doing exactly what we want it to do. And that means that Sarah Connor and the unborn John Connor and this guy from the future are absolutely terrorists. So, you know, Homeland Security their asses and send in the fucking T-800 because obviously we need to send in a freaking future tank robot. the idea that a Terminator could somehow become a hero or a heroic figure that's like emblematic of a diseased and decaying society right there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Even down to the fact that like in Terminator 2, it's because John Connor reprogrammed it, not because it was just inherently supposed to be the good guy.
Yeah.
And it's like the fact that Americans got so behind and identified with the Terminator in the first movie that they had to make him the hero in the second.
Well,
it's like,
it makes sense.
That says a lot.
American culture, especially like within American gun culture, they have in many ways deified the AR-15. Every time that there's a shooting, AR-15 bullets and gun prices go up and demand goes up and supply is just non-existent. And so it makes sense that a machine would be deified and rendered the hero instead of the actual people in the story. It's like we all care about speed from Speed Racer, but I think more people are into the Mach 5 than they are the actual story.
Definitely.
Like I'm willing to wager that most people, when asked about Speed Racer, they would know about the car. They might not know its name, but they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't know what the story is. Like Racer X just sounds like a cool name for a competitor, but would they understand who Racer X even is? The same thing with like tribalism with vehicles. You got Ford versus Dodge versus Chevy for the last, the entirety of American car culture. And I mean, I don't know how violent it actually gets, but I see people with stickers where they have a snide-looking Calvin peeing on a logo. And from what I've gathered,
it's got to be the absolute weirdest mind frame, especially because a lot of them don't work for those companies.
Yeah.
Well, my dad worked for Ford, but he never put that shit on his vehicle.
Well, the thing that I gathered from all of those stickers is that Calvin doesn't actually care about any of those brands. He pees on all of them.
That's true. That's very true.
So it's
the person who owns the Calvin stickers is like capitalizing off of those people's. This is like fucking war profiteering 101. It's like find opposition and supply them both with weapons.
Oh man.
Yeah, Calvin's like fuck all your brands.
I'll pee on everything.
And then there's only like proper, it should be Calvin peeing on Calvin in one. Inception. Like, oh, you hate Calvin peeing on stuff? I'll pee on your Calvin and still make money off of it. That's how capitalism capitalizes off of people's hatred. It makes them think that they're like saying something when they're just giving somebody money to capitalize off of them hating. That's why I don't really, when people like buy bumper stickers that are like Confederate flags or shit like that, where I'm like, oh, you paid, this person's probably in China. They didn't make that shit in America. I can guarantee you, because we fucking outsourced our production. So I guarantee you, half that racist shit is some Chinese people laughing at your asses, thinking that you're paying, like, supporting America. But if you look, it's probably made in China or Vietnam or some shit. And that's why, anytime somebody is like expressing themselves through capitalism, it's usually hilariously ironic in a way that they don't mean it to be. Like, imagine being like, make America great again, and buying some shit that was made in China with that shit on it. The fucking Chinese people just laughing. Fucking, yeah.
I mean,
I know
that there were some embroidery shops in the United States that made some money off of the MAGA stuff. But I also know that a significant amount of the MAGA stuff that appeared on like Amazon absolutely came from China. Like 100% unequivocally came from China. And some of that stuff had like thousands of reviews. So
oh yeah, and that's why it's so fucking funny, because it's like these are the people who think that they can make America great again by buying Chinese products and not double checking if they're actually supporting like China taking over American production, and then be like, we're the richest country in the world. Well, it's because your dollar is over fucking inflated, and you just like have this false sense of value while the Chinese government and Chinese industry take everything that actually is needed to produce things. But we have this fucking dollar. Americans are so stupid.
I wonder what the dollars to tears exchange rate is. I mean, I know it's pretty low, but
oh man,
it's like 10 million tears for 10 cents. Is that what it comes out to? That's the reason no tears are shed. There's no.
I don't
money
know,
in it.
but when the richest man in the world is an Indian guy and no longer an American with their fucking overvalued speculative stocks, that's when American capitalism is really in trouble. That shit is hilarious. Like,
oh man,
I don't know if we're supposedly still the richest country in the world, but the richest quote unquote man in the world ain't from here anymore.
I'm trying
that
to.
Shit is hilarious.
I mean, since Voldemort's already taken, Lord, and he's I guess. I mean, Saruman, I guess, is pretty fitting. He's complaining that about the carbon tax again because it's not helping him anymore. And he's also complaining because his company wasn't invited to some conference that the government, held about the future of electric vehicles in this country. And he's pissed off because he's like, oh, I'm the leader of blah, blah, blah electric people. And it's because his company doesn't work with unions. And that's like the requirement now for the government aid is you got to do it through a union. And he's complaining about some SpaceX stuff even because none of his projects are actually returning what they promised. He promised to give us a $30,000 or a $40,000 electric truck by last year, and that's not going to happen next year either. And he promised an affordable $30,000 electric car, and that never happened. And of course, he's got his excuses, like supply chain and materials and all this other stuff. Tesla doesn't have a shortage of revenue. I don't see any Tesla commercials. I see Ford commercials. I see Chevy commercials. I see every other manufacturer. My understanding is that Tesla spends all their money on R&D, and that's how they're able to make some significant advances. But they lack the fundamental manufacturing part of actually bringing the product to market. They've had years now. They had a fully, air quote, fully functional Cybertruck with windows that did not do what they were promised. But it doesn't exist.
Well, and now they
just
promised
doesn't.
The robot, which is not going to happen. I think they're supposed to said it's supposed to be delivered in October, which that should definitely like the first prototype.
I wish him the best of luck on Mars, really. I do. I hope he gets there and stays there.
Well, and it's funny that I saw a video where somebody was explaining all the times in history that someone promised they would deliver a robot and it was just like a person in a costume. And it's been decades and decades of people doing this shit where...
Well, Honda has Asimo, and that's a functional robot, and Boston Dynamics has their robots.
There's not that functional robots don't exist. It's more so them saying that they're going to make humanoid robots.
Oh, yeah, Boston Dynamics isn't attempting to build a humanoid robot. They've done the math. They understand how physics works, and they understand it's impossible to store a battery pack that is sufficient to power those things anywhere except on their back. And so it raises their center of mass and places it behind them. It requires to have a completely different set of physical motions. I actually watched a VFX breakdown of Boston Dynamics robots, and they said the reason they know that they're not CG and the reason they know that these things are actually doing what we see in videos is because the level of the attention to detail required to do it requires like a Disney level of visual effects department, like entire teams to pull off the level of accuracy that Boston Dynamics achieved with their dancing robot video. And then they also pointed out that the Boston Dynamics robots don't move like humans at all, and that there's just no way to make a human move that way because we can't carry that kind of enough mass to displace our center of mass far enough away to force us to behave like that. Also, our joints don't move like robot joints. So the idea that a humanoid robot is even gonna, I mean, like maybe 10 minutes, it's gonna burn out its batteries real fast because where's it gonna? Unless it's gonna be tethered, and that's just a non-starter. Who wants a fucking tethered robot? Actually, I would like a tethered robot.
So I'm wondering if they're going. So I bet one of the issues that they were also bringing up is like remote control to mimic automated response, so that it's actually got the servos and everything, but somebody's just controlling it remotely to make it appear as if it's autonomous.
Oh, so it's just,
that's what I think.
It's an ROV then. It's not even a robot.
Right. That's what I feel like Tesla's about to do, and they're going to get called out for it, because if this was like 5 years ago, they wouldn't get called out. But Elon's been doing too many fucking grifts lately.
Well, a remote operated humanoid machine could be useful in extremely hostile environments.
Except it's not. Humans aren't set up well to accommodate for lifting heavy weights. So this is where like something that is humanoid but also 120 pounds is going to be limited to lifting like 30, 40 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that.
I think the only reason
and that's why I'm not putting it
would be to use human tools, and that's it.
Right, but then this is where having somebody actually do it is going to be more efficient and effective than having something that has potential dexterity issues, and is going to have like some sort of, especially if it's still remote operated and not automated. Then the person's just adding another layer of, unless you're, talking about going into a nuclear reactor or some shit, where just a full on. But then that's where
it would have to be tethered. It would have to be tethered. It would still suffer all of the other problems that every other robot that has ever been sent into a reactor has faced, which is it's so hot that they melt.
Right, but this is also why they don't build them in a humanoid form, because they can also sustain more structural resistance and damage if they're not set up like us, which are not really built for carrying things well or for resisting damage, because our points of vulnerability are easily accessible, and that's where it's like something that's built like a tank is going to have a much better capacity for resistance in dynamic situations, whereas like I said, the humanoid shape is just bilateral symmetry is good for certain things, but it's not good like especially in tandem with bipedal structure for carrying things that are heavy, or for like lateral motion. Like our body's really not good at like lateral motion in terms of we're supposed to move forward, and when we move laterally, unless a person does it frequently, it's going to cause a lot of stress and potentially cause a breakdown. And this is where like people tear their shit moving laterally a lot of times.
Yeah,
it's like sudden lateral motion where sudden forward motion isn't going to cause the same types of stress as the lateral, but to put the same type of force on them is, that's the potential difference between a torn ACL or MCL or whatever. Because like I said, a lot of times it's the lateral motion.
Yeah, now that I think about it, the only times I've ever sprained my ankles were when I was attempting to play basketball and moving to the sides.
Which is why those high tops are there to reinforce the ankle for lateral motion. But in the process, they make the ankle muscles weaker. So it's this double-edged sword of like, if you wear high top shoes too much, your ankles will be supported when you're wearing them. But if you're not wearing them, they're going to be more susceptible to lateral damage, specifically. So that's, it's like a really hard balance to know when you should wear support versus when you should not wear support to strengthen that area.
When I was a Boy Scout, we would wear boots when we were hiking or carrying a backpack of any weight or doing anything where we had to lift things. But as I recall, most people would wear tennis shoes when we were just like walking around or doing things. I think boots or shoes designed to provide additional support, they're like it's specialized equipment. It's
yeah, for sure.
It's high performance gear. It's not the kind of thing to be just. You aren't supposed to wear big work boots all the time.
No, definitely not. And if anything, they should have specialized insoles that are gel or some sort of foam so that it accommodates for like the heavier boot with more stress on the joints.
Yeah. I'm sure that there are like advancements in boot or shoe sole material that are lighter but just as durable. Plastics are pretty amazing. Like the whole like petrochemical industry for as many problems as it causes that was the material revolution that changed everything. All of a sudden you don't have to have it carved out of wood or stamped out of metal. Just form it out of plastic with a vacuum.
Yeah, which is like, if it had been not deployed in tandem with throwaway culture, it wouldn't have been as bad.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's what created throwaway culture, because throwaway culture kind of existed before plastic. It's not that. I think plastic just made it worse because it became cheaper and easier to throw things away.
Yeah, but it created that whole disposable economy.
Yeah, where before it was like throwaway culture existed, but there wasn't as much of an accessible disposable economy. Whereas, once stuff becomes like intentionally disposable, then people are definitely going to throw that shit away. Whereas, like, you get people who like recycle plastic cups, and you're like, you ain't gotta do like. I mean, and I don't mean by taking them to recycling bin. I mean by like washing them and reusing plastic cups. So I'm like, that's a little too far. But in the wrong direction. Like, instead of getting glass where they wash their plastic. So I don't know.
It's true. It's like there's an entire culture of people who buy the absolute best tools. And then on the other end, there are people who buy tools that are essentially one-time use. And you might get a couple of uses or 3 or 4, but eventually they're going to wear out and they're going to fail. And then, well, that's why they're really inexpensive and cheap. But it makes sense if a person's only going to use the tool one time or for one project and they're never going to do it again. Sure, get the cheap thing that's disposable, because there really isn't a reason to go ham and get the $200 hammer. But for the person that does that all day long, all day strong, and they need it to be reliable and last till they die so they can give it to their grandkid or whatever. Yeah, that makes sense. I think there is a spectrum of like use, expectations, need, willingness to part with money. I think things on the extreme high end and extreme low end are the real problems. Because one exists only for the sake of aspiration in most cases, and the other is it exists for the sake of necessity on some level, maybe. I don't know.
Well, uh, I mean, I guess this gets back to again, like, how much of this is self-fulfilling prophecies by this like reduction in funding for arts and creativity. Like, I feel like we keep getting back to that.
Yeah, if one's unable to abstract the nature of simple economics, of like the cost of hammers and versus like need and utility, then they're never going to understand the necessity of reading comprehension or the importance of engaging in creative writing.
Or how weather patterns work. And that's like, if somebody's not educated enough to see like relation between the ocean and the wind on the land, or the bodies of water, and then why those bodies of water shouldn't be polluted, then they're never going to get to the glaciers melting or how that impacts everything else. Or
trying to explain to people that the oceans and the air, the column of air directly above that body of water are in fact one thing is actually very difficult.
Or the atmosphere above that body of water being continuous, like all the way to the edge of space.
Yeah, that's right. There's NASA confirmed that the Earth's atmosphere reaches the moon at something like 16 parts per million of hydrogen, which is incredible. I mean, it's not that much, but it's still incredible.
I mean, but that gets back to like interstellar material, things that we didn't, as a species know existed.
Yeah.
Like the interstellar medium, where that's how they can say, there are sound waves that are bigger than entire planets.
Or that there's plasma in the interstellar medium that's like thousands of degrees hot.
Yeah.
That would just melt our satellites like in an instant. It's crazy how much our sun's ionosphere protects us, or magnetosphere. Freaking heliopause.
Yeah. Well, and that's another one where they didn't even know the heliopause existed until Voyager tried to get out of it and couldn't immediately.
Took it several years, but it finally made it. Go Team NASA.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm always interested to see how, on the one hand, science is like keeping people alive, but then capitalism tries to take credit for it and then undermines science in the process, and how that ultimately makes capitalism have a shorter lifespan. It's very, very much towards the end of its life cycle, and part of it is because of the anti-intellectualism. It just wasn't sustainable.
No candle can burn itself at both ends forever. It just burns brighter and hotter and faster. And then we're all left in the dark.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a. I don't think there's a peaceful solution to the eventual decline or demise of capitalism. Every revolution I've ever read about where there's extensive economic reform after the fact, it's like very painful for everybody. Every time there's a war and a regional economy collapses, it's painful for everyone. No, not everyone. There are a few people who profit off of it because they have friends who are outside and have resources. But it never works out for everyone. It only works out for a few people.
And that's like, you see that this, the same way that now they're threatening nukes in Ukraine, they have to put all the effort and capital into maintaining these hierarchies and structures when we're at a point that there's like enough food for 10 billion people, even though we have 8 billion, but food for 3 billion gets thrown away because of capitalism. So it's not that we don't have enough for everyone. And I think there's roughly the same amount of vacant homes as there are homeless people in America. So it's not a matter of not having enough homes to house the homeless. Poverty, like people not being able to eat, and homelessness are policy choices, and not because there aren't enough resources at this point, but because there's this notion of everyone being given the equal opportunity to make it in capitalism, that the people who can't eat or can't afford to house themselves, it's their fault. That's like a remnant of specifically Protestant Christianity that's trying to like find this guilt-ridden individualist perspective that gives people this sense of guilt enough to keep for yourself, but just for yourself. And those people would then also not adhere to the like actual Jesus like ideology of it's harder for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Like they don't want to integrate that part of the philosophy. And it's like this exorbitant wealth that comes with these hoarding societies also are often the same societies that try to invoke Christianity when that shit is specifically listed as a way to not get into heaven in Christianity. Like you're definitely not getting into heaven if you hoarded resources and were party to creating a situation in which your common man is living in poverty because that person hoarded.
You remind me of the gospel of supply side Jesus, who said that it's easier for a rich man to ride a camel through the eyes of a needle than it's easy for a rich man to ride a camel through the eye of a needle to get into heaven or something like that. They totally butcher it. And then supply side Jesus is talking about how he gets his nails done, how he's got this nice stuff, and he's like charming the shit out of Pontius Pilate and trying to convince the people. It's like, hey, I'll give you money if you send this other fake Jesus to the cross. It's really cynical. The gospel of supply side Jesus. It's the only work of Al Franken's that I can recall, and yeah.
Oh, right. That's back when Al Franken was still relevant.
Yeah. But the gospel of supply side Jesus still holds true.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's really funny because they were trying to bring back Al Franken and bring him out of cancellation. Like, if all these Republicans do, why can't Al Franken? It's like, no, leave his old ass on the sidelines, man. Like, we don't need to go back to the fucking well just because his offense wasn't terrible doesn't mean we need to bring him out of retirement. Like, we need new blood in like our leadership roles, not just fucking more old people that, oh, he used to be someone we thought was left enough. Like, no, even Al Franken is not left enough at this point to be bringing out of retirement. There's too many young people that should be put in positions of leading the conversations and not like fucking Nancy Pelosi or Al Franken or fucking any old people. Like, old people should just get the fuck out of the way, because it's not that they don't have to deal with it while they're like waiting to die. It's more so we can't have people who are that close to death deciding for like people who have 70, 80, fucking 90 years left to have to deal with the consequences of these people's decisions, because these are the people who are like, let's fucking use nukes, these fucking old ass pieces of shit. And that's where it's like, no young person's out here trying to fucking nuke some shit and make the world uninhabitable for the rest of everyone else. It's just some fucking old people who are okay with the fact that they're close to death and are trying to take everybody else with them. And it's like, fuck those old people. We need to get them out of any position of flexing their mortality on the rest of us and making everybody else put in a position where we might fucking die because they felt like, oh, if I can't party anymore, then the rest of the people can't do it either. So I'm going to drop this fucking nuke. And it's like, that's only some shit old people with no consequences would do. And that's, again, whether it's in Russia or America or fucking Ukraine. We can't have, I mean, Ukraine, Zelensky's a piece of shit, though. He's just a younger piece of shit. Zelensky's definitely a piece of shit. Like, we really got to get out of these power structures of like single entities being like figureheads. And I don't know if Americans definitely aren't. I don't know if humanity is mature enough yet. So I'm not going to be like expecting some shit that I know realistically humanity's not ready to do. But in a sense, I feel like now more than ever, it's like, it's impossible for one fucking person to speak for like 3 people, let alone 330 whatever fuck million we have now.
Seriously,
so
I don't even like ordering for somebody else at a restaurant.
No, fuck no. Fuck no.
Even if I know what they're
I don't like when
get.
people order for me. I fucking hate it when people try to order for me. Like, there's like 3 people that I would be okay with having like trust that they would know what I would enjoy to let them order for me. That's about it. So it's like, I definitely hate when somebody like at a food thing tries to order for an entire group. That shit pisses me the fuck off. So I definitely don't want one person making some political decision for me, let alone for the rest of the country. So that's where I'm like, increasingly, it feels as if direct democracy is something that we should be getting closer to, because it's definitely possible, but it just seems like, I don't know if people actually want democracy or if they just want to call themselves democracy and be oligarchs or have oligarchs. It's like
people like calling themselves Christian, but don't act like,
exactly,
don't uphold the ideology. They
think
talk
that they
the
can
talk,
just use
but they
the
can't
label.
walk at the walk.
Yeah. And it's like, if we say we're democracy, then we're not a plutocracy. Well, that's not exactly how it works.
Well, within the continuum of language being defined by the people that use the language, if that's how they're using the language on some really weird technical level, then sure, but it's also a really poor misinterpretation of democracy. That's a real big stretch, too. Like, I'm not even going to buy that myself.
Well, it's just, I always revisit these conversations when we start getting inundated with propaganda about other countries. And it's like, oh, there's like a revolution happening in Iran right now. And it's like, well, what happened to the one here? Why are we talking about what's happening in Iran when there's like some shit that was happening here, but y'all suddenly we need to focus on Iran and instead of like the fucking police state that we have here. Like, I don't even know if what you're telling me is true about Iran, but I know that there's a police state problem here that you're specifically ignoring by talking about Iran or Ukraine.
Well,
so what's up with that?
All right, it's similarly to the China coup that somehow
Exactly,
only
that too,
India was
yeah.
reporting about it. Why was the news only coming out of
Yeah.
India and Nepal? Like, wait, what? And I think Pakistan got in on it too. But they're all on the border of China, and they probably have tensions with China.
I heard more about the Chinese coup than January 6th shit. You know what I mean? Like January 6th, we had a whole ass fucking coup in our own country. Somehow we're hearing about revolutions in Iran and China coup. Like, but we still don't have any resolution on the actual coup in our own fucking country yet. It's like that shit. Like,
oh no, wait, there was an update. The special master who's reviewing the potentially classified information has to hire a second set of eyes. And it's going to cost $500 an hour, and they're going to bill and they're going to bill the what's his name?
oh, you mean the communications that they tried to delete or tried to get rid of because they were communications between Secret Service and people within the fucking insurrection?
Yeah.
But then they realized too late that you can't delete anything in digital forever. So if you do it digitally, there's a trace out there somewhere. No matter you think you got that shit deleted, it's still a trace fucking somewhere.
There's a log that says that the file was deleted or that the data was deleted.
Yeah.
and it probably points to some index on a backup tape somewhere in a cold facility that only comes online once a month to back up the hot site that is backing itself up every day.
Their redundant listening devices became their own demise because again, there's too much redundancy in a lot of these listening systems to actually delete shit if it's ever digitized. And it's like out there somewhere forever that you don't necessarily like. Whoever puts it out there doesn't necessarily have control over it, including the NSA, because they don't control all of the information transmission. So that means that like even when they're dealing with their own channels, there's going to be other channels that can pick up on their conversations, like whether it's just an electrical outlet or an actual third-party device that has a microphone on it. And that's like the digital world is, it really just never forgets. And I think the people within our government that took that shit for granted are about to find out, like, yeah, even if you're in government with highest level clearance, internet ain't gonna forget about your shit either. Even if you try to scrub it, it's gonna have a memory out there somewhere.
Oh, I think
the internet does not forget.
I think the idea that people can cover their tracks in an absolute police state is just the most amusing outcome of all of this. Like, oh, you're a skilled enough hacker that you can scrub your entire presence from the internet? Bravo.
Well, and here's the issue is like that person exists out there, but they never really had a presence on the internet in the first place.
Exactly.
You know, and that's the difference between that person and what we have in our government, because those don't really overlap either. The people who end up working in government aren't always the smartest, and in general aren't the best or the brightest. But that's because we put a system where they don't get paid the best. So once again, capitalism starts to eat its own tail because the people who are supposed to tasked to be the best and brightest get poached by this system that has more money and capital elsewhere besides the government. So at the end of the day, it's kind of funny to watch it eat its own tail.
We love that.
Yeah. definitely not sustainable.
Not sustainable at all. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.